Hi everyone, and thank you for watching another Gaffer and Gear. In today's episode we're going to take a look at the Element G900 bi-color light from Soonwell. So this is a bow and mount 900 watt bi-color light. It has modular design, so you can do things like remove the handles around. You can remove it from its stirrup. It is very lightweight and compact. The head here only comes in at 5 kilograms. The light has an IP rating, so you can use it out in the rain, and it also has DMX control. Now, I've just realized something that I forgot to mention all the way through this episode, and that was the CCT range of this light. It is 2600 Kelvin to 6000 Kelvin, tunable in 100 Kelvin increments. All right, so to start off the review, I'm going to give you some sort of size comparison here. So we've got the 900 here that we're reviewing, and I've got the Nanlite Forza 720B here, which is a very powerful bi-color light. 720 watts, 900 watts. So you know, this is a little bit taller, but as you can see, it's very compact for something that's pulling more power draw and brighter. It's a very compact unit. Now, in terms of brightness, if I don't go through a brightness comparison at this point, I know you guys are going to fill up the comment section. So let's talk about 3200 Kelvin first. So at 3200 Kelvin, the Soonwell 900 comes in at 31% brighter than the Nanlite 720. That's about where you'd expect it to sit. However, it's a different story at 5600 Kelvin. The chipset on the Nanlites are very efficient. So at 5600 Kelvin, the Soonwell only comes in at 14% brighter, so not a huge difference there. Now, in terms of other comparisons, the Soonwell here has an IP rating, so you can use it out in the rain as long as you don't tilt it past 45 degrees, the head and the controller, whereas this doesn't. Now, the Nanlite has better dimming over DMX than this unit does, so it all comes down to what you want. All right, so let's go through how much it costs and what you get for your money. So it sells for about $2,500 US. If you're using Monopoly money, that's about 3,600 bucks is what I've seen it listed for. All right, so for that it comes in a bag. The bag's very well constructed, wheels at one end, pull out handle. You've seen them before, don't need to go over that. All right, so let's open up and take a look inside. The first thing on top is the removable stirrup. Now, the removable stirrup has way too many connectors at this end or lock-offs. I don't understand why it's got so many. All right, so you don't need that one. You don't actually need this one. What I actually do like about this design, and I sort of wonder, how come no other manufacturer has done this? Rather than having a screw-in thread here that you can put your baby pin into, that just removes. That sort of makes a lot more sense. I'm forever having people lose these. That just makes a lot more sense. Now, this is made of aluminium, so every attempt has been made to reduce weight in this thing. All right, so let's put that on the stand. The next thing in the kit is the instruction manual, so that's always handy to have one of those things and have a look through. All right, so the next thing I'll pull out is there's a little V-mount adapter here that goes onto your stand. All right, so this has got a very nice wide jaw on it, and that's for mounting your power supply and controller, which has a V-mount on it. All right, next thing I'll pull out is the light. All right, so one thing with the light, it is very front heavy. So if I just put my hand here, okay, you can see it collapses forward. So the cooling system weighs next to nothing in terms of all of the heat sink. Where the weight is all the copper pipes that lead to the cooling system and the LED array. Now, to mount it onto the stirrup, it uses the same connections as a V-mount battery. Now, one thing that can catch you out here is the lock and unlock up here. So a regular V-mount unlock, like on a battery plate, you hold it down to unlock, and then you release your finger and it relocks. Whereas this, you press it to unlock, and then you press it to lock it again. So you just got to be very careful. Make sure that you definitely have it locked once you put the light on. So it's always worth checking that. The next thing we'll talk about is the controller. Okay, so the head and the controller have an IP rating. It's not actually printed on the device. I actually had to ask them what the IP rating, but I can't remember the numbers, but it's the IP rating where, you know, the head's okay as long as you don't go past 45 degrees, okay? And the control box also has an IP rating. So on the bottom of the control box here, we've got our power in, we've got DC in as well, so you can run it at full power off a DC battery if you've got something with that pin configuration and a powerful enough battery system. And we've got DMX in and DMX out, which is 5-pin XLR. Now there's a USB port down there that has power out for running your CRMX dongles, but apparently it's not there for firmware updates. Now up the top we have power out to the light, and we have an on-off switch. On the front of the controller you have a very easy to read LCD screen, and on the home page it displays your dimmer value, your CCT and your dimmer curve. Underneath that you have some quick set buttons. The dimmer button toggles between 13%, 25%, 50%, 75% and 100%. You also have some quick preset options for your CCT by pressing the CCT button. 3200, 4000 Kelvin and 5600 Kelvin. Alternatively, you can press the dial knob to select your parameter and then rotate to change the value. In the menu, you can find your other options such as your effects. It has the traditional effects that you'd expect from a bicolor light. The rest of the menu system is pretty straightforward, so there's not much to cover off here. Now, one thing to point out here is it does take V-mount batteries. If you run it off batteries, it runs with a 300 watt maximum power draw limit. Now, just like with the head, once you mount the controller to the V-mount clamp, just make sure it's on, make sure it's locked, okay? So just press the button again on the release if it's not. All right, the next thing we get is a head lead, which is a nice flexible material. It looks like a heat-resistant silicon. Now, it's got the same pin configuration at each end, so you can't connect it in wrong. It's 5 meters long. I find that a little bit of a disappointment because with a light this lightweight, I'd be wanting something longer than 5 meters because my intent would be to put this onto something like, say, a menace arm. Now, one thing I don't like about the design of this is the cable plugs into the front of the head. So it means you need a large stirrup to give you clearance. Now, the second last thing in the kit is a power cable. Now, it's got a nice solid connector that goes into the light end, but the problem I have with it is it's not a PowerCon connector, which has sort of become the industry standard. So my concern with this would be if somebody loses or misplaces this cable, you can't turn the light on, whereas if it was a PowerCon connector, I've got at least 5 or 6 spare ones over there. And the last thing we get is a dish. All right, so let's go through the pros and cons that I haven't touched on yet. And the first thing we'll look at is the stirrup. So it's got dual ratchet handle lock-offs, and you need both of those. All right, so I've got it done up fairly tight, and as you can see, there is easily got play in there. You can easily move it around with the lock-offs up. Now, in terms of how much of an issue that is, I think if you had a big modifier like a DOP Choice 5-foot dome, I think you'd be okay. Until you put the snap grid on, I think a snap grid, this would definitely take a dive forwards. Given the fact that the head is already biased forwards in terms of the weight, I definitely don't think this could take something like an Aperture F10 Fresnel, for example. There's just no way the lock-off would hold that. But in terms of other modifiers, I don't think it would be a problem. All right, so the next thing I don't like about the stirrup is the size of it. It is huge. So you've got this small light, massive stirrup, but not necessarily a problem in terms of your rigging. Because this thing is modular, you can take the head off. Now, the handle can reposition from front to back. Now, the handle is aluminium, so if you wanted to rig this and have it into a fairly small space, you could put a Cardellini clamp on here, for example, going into a grip head. Okay, so that would really reduce the size of it in terms of its rigging space. If you wanted to point it straight down, well, that wouldn't be a problem either, because you could just put the handle onto the back and point it straight down that way, have it rigged from the handle. Now, in terms of the construction, it does look very plasticky. I was quite concerned when I first pulled it out of the bag, but I quickly realized that the housing is actually lightweight aluminium, so it's actually metal. It's just coated in plastic because a plastic coating is more durable than paint. Now, the next concern for me is the cooling fans. The cooling fans turn on and off as required. You have no control over them, so they're not running consistently. They turn on and turn off and run at different speeds. Now at the moment we've got the cooling fan in the head running at full speed, and you can probably just hear it on my microphone. I reckon this is borderline acceptable, so you wouldn't have a microphone this close to the light in reality. However, we've only got the one fan running at the moment. If the fan in the controller decides to fire up at full speed, things can get really loud. And at that point, I think it's not acceptable in terms of its volume in an interview environment. Right, so the next thing is the light can be operated over a phone app. Now, I've totally given up reviewing phone apps because at the end of the day, all I can really tell you is if the phone app works with one light. It might be completely different with 2 or 3 lights. Plus I use Android, you might be on iOS, so I've just given up. All right, now the next possible pro or con depends on your point of view, and that is to do with the dimming system. So the light uses potentiometer dimming. It doesn't use pulse width modulation. So what does all that fancy talk mean? Well, with potentiometer dimming, the light is not flickering at high speed. There's no flicker at all. So the plus side to that is no matter what shutter speed you film at, no matter what frame rate you film at, you cannot get flicker off this light. And that is something that is important because it is a very powerful lighting tool. Now the negative with potentiometer dimming is sometimes at certain kelvins, you can get some variation when you're dimming in terms of your CCT and your color hues. Now I've taken a whole stack of samples here at 3200 Kelvin, and it's very impressive. There's very little drift here in terms of the CCT and in terms of the color hue. This is very impressive. However, these are the daylight results, and as you can see, there is quite a bit of CCT shift and quite a bit of color hue shift. So where this can bone you is if you're trying to do dimming. So bear in mind, this thing has DMX, so you might want to be doing some DMX cues, in which case this is not great in daylight, but we'll talk about that more later. One of the big pros for this light is its color render across the entire range. The lowest TM30 color score I recorded was 94 and the highest was 96. All right, let's pull out all of the hard light Bowen modifiers I've got and let's see how this thing goes. Let's start off with no modifier attached, and the light has a very broad, even beam which could easily light up any softbox modifier. The results are the same regardless of the CCT that you dial in. And for a bicolor light, the shadows are very sharp. Now let's take a look at the supplied reflector. And for a faceted dish, it actually has quite an even beam. There is a bit of drop off on the edges, but nothing that I'd be concerned about. And regardless of the CCT that you dial in, the results are the same. And the shadows are what I'd expect from a dish like this. Next, I thought I'd see how it goes with the Aperture LS1200D Pro Reflector Kit, because this 3-dish kit only costs $179 US. The first dish that I tried out of this kit was the Flood Hyper Reflector. And this does give you quite a wide, even beam, although it's not as even as it would be if it was on an Aperture light. The results are the same regardless of the CCT that you dial in. Now to me, it doesn't look that much wider than the supplied reflector, and you're only getting about 75% of the light, so it might not be worth it. The shadows are cleaner, but you're still getting some distinct double shadowing. Next, I tried the medium hyper reflector, and to me the results look almost identical to the reflector that is supplied standard with the light. The only real difference is you get about 28% more light level. Now 28% sounds like a lot, but in terms of an f-stop, it's hardly anything, so it might not be worth the effort. The results were the same regardless of the CCT dialed in. And the shadows, well, they're not so great. The last dish I tried from this kit was the narrow hyper reflector. And this combination gives you a massive amount of firepower, which could be handy if you're doing high-speed filming, remembering that this light has absolutely no flicker. Now with this reflector, there is definitely a hotspot, but have a look at the lux readings. 32,400 lux at 3 meters at 3200 Kelvin, and at 5600 Kelvin, 38,000 lux. That is a lot of firepower. However, there is quite a lot of light wrapping around the shadows with this dish. Now, one accessory that does work really well with this light is the Nanlite FL206 Fresnel. Now, this Fresnel works so well, you'd swear it was made to work with this light. But just a word of caution here, this Fresnel, you can use it on the Nanlite 720 series. But this is 900 watt, not 720. So to be on the safe side, if you're going to use this combination, maybe run it at 80%. Now, I've done quite a bit of testing in here running it at 100% brightness, but here's my disclaimer. We haven't had any really hot days in Melbourne, and it's one thing to run it in a workshop, but to have it outside in direct sunlight on a hot day could do some damage, I don't know. So with this combination, you get a very nice even beam with a beautiful drop off on the edge. Regardless of the CCT that you dial in. It barn door cuts just as good as it does with a Forza light. Again, regardless of the CCT. However, it doesn't seem to spot up as much as it would if it was on a Forza 720. And in flood, the shadows are just as good as any good Fresnel that I've used. Next, I tried it on the Nanlite projection attachment, and it seems to work okay, but it does have a bit of a sloppy fit. Now, I was very surprised to see the results. You get a beautiful even beam with sharp edges regardless of the CCT that you dial in. It even does really crisp cuts, as good as it would with a Forza light attached. Linear gobo projections are really sharp regardless of the CCT that you dial in. And there is plenty of room for defocusing before you see the LED emitters. However, with circular patterns, I can't seem to get the entire gobo to be in focus. It's either sharp around the edges or sharp in the center. Now, once again, I would suggest running this combination at 80% brightness to be safe, because this projector mount was not really designed to run a 900 watt COB. Alright, so before we get into testing the DMX, we'll just talk about some of the limitations with dimming this light. Alright, so as I mentioned earlier, it's got potentiometer dimming. So that means down in the low ends with these lights, you can have some problems with the color balance and the color hues. Now, if you're running this thing at 3200 Kelvin or warm white, you can get right down to about 3% and it still looks really, really good. But the problem we have is with daylight. So I've got it at the moment set to 5600 Kelvin. So let's take a look. So I've got it at 20% on the dimmer and it's pretty good there. Now, if I dim it down and get it to 15%, this is where it starts warming up. So I'm going to go from 15% now and slowly go down. The light gets warmer and more magenta. So at the moment it's at 5% here, and it's currently dropped to 4300 Kelvin. So it's gone from roughly 5600 Kelvin to 4300 Kelvin at this point at 5% brightness, and it's quite magenta. But that's not where the problems end. If we drop it to 4%, so I'll go one more percent down, we've now lost our warm white emitters. They've turned off. So in terms of dimming this thing, let's say you want to run it over DMX and you're looking to do a fade up from black, that's where you hit problems, particularly in the daylight. So if we're fading up from black over DMX, of course, you get this instant jump to 1%, and then at 5%, it goes to magenta and quite warm, and then it slowly goes up to 5600 Kelvin by the time you get to 20%. So look, that's sort of fair enough for the price point that you're paying for this thing, but it is something that's worth pointing out if you're hoping to use this unit to do fade to blacks over DMX control. All right, so let's begin the DMX testing. So the light is running off an 8-bit 2-channel profile, and it is receiving its commands via a Lumen Radio CRMX receiver. To give you something to compare it to, I have a Titan tube that is also running off CRMX. Both lights will be receiving identical commands at the same time. Let's start off with instant on-off commands. Now let's look at half-second automated cues. Now we're going to look at 1 second automated cues. Now for 2.5 second automated cues. Now let's have a look at 5 second automated cues. Now let's do some instant CCT changeovers between 3200 Kelvin and 5600 Kelvin. Now let's look at some half-second CCT automated cues. Now let's look at some 1 second automated CCT cues. Now some 2.5 second automated CCT cues. And now let's do some 5 second automated cues. Now let's finish off the testing with some random manual dimmer commands. Now with the Q testing between 0 and 100% brightness there, I had the light set to 5600 Kelvin and you could see what I was talking about. It has that definite color shift in the bottom end and that definite jerk as it goes to 1%. Now, in terms of the pros with the DMX, if you're doing a CCT transition and you're above 15%, it is very smooth, beautifully smooth. If you're doing a intensity change and you're in warm white mode and you're going anywhere from say 3% to 100% or anywhere in between, it is beautifully smooth. And if you're doing a fade in daylight above 15%, it is beautifully smooth. Now, one criticism I do have with the DMX logic on this is for some reason you can only set an odd address DMX number. So what I mean by that is you can set addresses 1, 3, 5, 7, 9 and so on, but you can't set addresses 2, 4, 6, 8, 10. Now, one positive with the DMX is it does retain its last command. So if it loses the DMX signal, it will stay with the last command that it received. If you turn the light off and then turn it back on again, it will stay with the previous DMX command that it had until it receives a new DMX command. As soon as the light receives the DMX signal, you'll get a D on the display here and the light will automatically switch over to DMX. So other than having to set an address, you don't need to go into the menu. All right, let's start going through all of the data I've collected, starting off with the power draw. After several days of testing, the maximum power draw recorded was 914 watt. Running at 3200 Kelvin, I recorded 831 watt. and at 5600 Kelvin, I recorded 877 watt. These are the brightness results for the light running off AC power. The meter was set to 400 ISO with a shutter speed of 1/50th of a second, set to 25 frames per second. And here are the brightness results when running off battery power. When running off battery power, the light is restricted to a 300 watt power draw. Alright, so let's take a look at the light's average CCT accuracies, and I've taken these readings through the dish because it seems to be calibrated for that. Between 2600 and 3000 Kelvin, the light is typically accurate to plus or minus 50 Kelvin. Between 3100 to 4000 Kelvin, the light is typically accurate to minus 47 Kelvin. From 4100 to 5000 Kelvin, the light is typically accurate to minus 86 Kelvin. And from 5100 to 6000 Kelvin, the light is typically out by minus 105 Kelvin. Alright, so let's take a look at the light's TM30 color render scores, and they're quite impressive. From 2600 Kelvin to 2800 Kelvin, the light scores a 95. From 2900 Kelvin to 3600 Kelvin, it scores a 96. From 3700 to 5600, it scores a 95. And from 5700 up, it scores a 94. Okay, let's take a closer look at how this thing performs at different kelvins, starting with the lowest kelvin that we can dial in. When I dialed in 2600 Kelvin, I got 2741. The TM30 color vector results were 95% average color accuracy with an average 99% color saturation. All of the CRI scores were plus 90. Here is the spectrum distribution. And the white point came in with a delta UV of plus 0.0012. When I dialed in 3200 Kelvin, I got 3158 with an SSI score of 87. The TM30 color vector results were 96% average color accuracy with an average 102% color saturation. Here are the CRI scores, and they're all plus 90. This is the spectrum distribution. And the white point was very accurate with a delta UV of minus 0.0003. When I dialed in 4400 Kelvin, I got 4330. The TM30 color vector results were 95% average color accuracy with an average 103% color saturation. Here are the CRI scores, and only R9 and R12 are below 90. This is the spectrum distribution. And the white point came in with a delta UV of minus 0.0034. When I dialed in 5600 Kelvin, I got 5483. The SSI score came in at 75. The TM30 color vector results were 95% color accuracy with an average 102% color saturation. Here are the CRI scores, and only R12 is below 90. This is the spectrum distribution. And the white point came in with a delta UV of minus 0.0002, which places it almost on top of the Planckian curve, but compared to the daylight curve, the light would be slightly magenta to about the equivalent of a 1/8 correction gel. When I dialed in the top CCT of 6000 Kelvin, I got 5844. The TM30 color vector results were 94% average color accuracy with a 101% average color saturation. With the CRI scores, only R12 is below 90. Here is the spectrum distribution, and the light came in with a delta UV of plus 0.0011. Now, I've also taken the data for this thing running off batteries, because running off batteries, it's only running at 30% maximum brightness, and it does have potentiometer dimming. So let's take a look. When I dialed in 3200 Kelvin, I got 3227. The SSI score came in at 85. The TM30 color vector results were 95% average color accuracy with an average 103% color saturation. Here are the CRI scores, and R9 and R11 are below 90. Here is the spectrum distribution, and the white point came in with a delta UV of minus 0.0005, which is very accurate. When I dialed in 5600 Kelvin at 100% brightness running off batteries, I only got 5126 Kelvin with an SSI score of 74. The TM30 color vector results came in with 95% color accuracy with an average 102% color saturation. Here are the CRI results, and only R12 is below 90. This is the spectrum distribution, and the white point came in with a delta UV of plus 0.0017, which places it halfway between the Planckian curve and the daylight curve. Alright, so that's another episode of Gaffer and Gear done, and what's got me really intrigued with this light is the amount of firepower for the weight. So it's 5 kilograms with the head and the handle. That is phenomenal. And such a compact cooling system. So that gives me hope for the future that maybe we'll have 2000 watt COB soon, and they won't be big lights. They'll be lighter than the HMIs that they're hopefully going to replace. Anyway, see you on the next episode of Gaffer and Gear. Take care.